We'll leave it there. Ethan Chorin writes in the New York Times recently. You can find his piece, The Deeper Blame for Benghazi, also author on Libya, Exit the Colonel, The Hidden History of the Libyan Revolution. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks very much.
And now live coverage of the House.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., May 21, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Daniel Webster to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for the morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member, other than the majority or minority leaders and the minority whip, limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall the debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. Chair recognizes a gentlewoman from California, Ms. Bass, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, let me say that my heart goes out to all of those in Oklahoma who experienced a terrible tragedy yesterday. And I know I will look forward to working with my colleagues to make sure that they get everything that they need to recover. On another note, I rise today to celebrate the 2nd Annual Congressional Foster Youth Shadow Day. Today we are joined in the halls of the U.S. Capitol by over 50 foster youth and alumni from across the country. They've been paired with members of Congress as job shadows to get a behind-the-scenes look at the inner workings of the House of Representatives. The young leaders will attend hearings, join meetings, and participate in media interviews. As we welcome these young leaders and recognize National Foster Care Month, throughout the month of May, we are reminded that foster youth far too often experience traumatic incidences of abuse and neglect and are separated from their homes and siblings. Yet even in the face of these challenges, the resiliency of foster youth remains strong. The young foster youth here today are no different. They were selected to participate in Congressional Foster Youth Shadow Day based on their leadership and commitment to improving the lives of foster youth and families across the nation. Today I'm honored to recognize and celebrate an incredible young woman with whom I have the privilege of sharing my morning. Marcelina Valenzuela is 24 years old and grew up in Los Angeles. She spent 7 years in the California foster care system. She entered foster care at birth due to drug addiction of her mother. She left foster care at age 4 only to return at age 15 because of ongoing neglect and abuse. Like far too many foster youth, she struggled with her education, sibling separation, and mental health because of the constant moving and upheaval while in foster care. Yet she was able to overcome these obstacles. Now Marcelina actively works with organizations such as Foster Club, the National Foster Youth Action Network, and Foster Care Alumni of America to improve and reform the foster care system so younger generations may not have to repeat the struggles and challenges that she faced. Today, Marcelina has custody of her 2 younger sisters, aged 14 and 16. She's only 24. Her ultimate goal is to finish school and then build a career around improving the foster care system. In fact, she hopes to open up her own nonprofit that focuses on helping youth coming out of the juvenile justice system. In honor of Marcelina's courage and tenacity, let us commit to doing what we can to ensure that 400,000 plus foster youth across the country have the opportunities, love, and families they deserve. As a first step, I invite my colleagues to join the Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth and to co-sponsor the bipartisan resolution in recognition of May as National Foster Care Month. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'm back on the floor again to talk about the failed policy in Afghanistan. This poster beside me, Mr. Speaker, is a cartoon that I got from the paper, and it says that it says CIA ATM. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the New York Times broke an article, a story that the CIA for over the last 10 years has been given hundreds of millions of dollars to Karzai. And I want to quote what Karzai said in that article. Karzai said he was assured that the CIA would continue delivering bags of cash bags of cash going to Karzai, the corrupt leader in Afghanistan. Mr. Speaker, what really makes this cartoon sad is in the back is an American soldier, and what he is thinking as Karzai has taken his cash money away from the CIA at the machine, the soldier is thinking, I'd like to make a quick withdrawal from here. I hope that during the debate in July on the appropriations bill dealing with the Defense Department that we will start passing amendments that say we need to stop this out-of-control spending in Afghanistan with very little accountability. Mr. Speaker, I am one that agrees with my party and some of the Democrats that we need to hold hearings on Benghazi and the Internal Revenue Service. But I have written to the leadership of the Armed Services Committee and the subcommittee chairman asking for a hearing on this out-of-control waste in Afghanistan. Not only did the CIA acknowledge that they've been given tens of millions of dollars in cash to Karzai for 10 years, but, Mr. Speaker, we are also authorizing $8 billion a month to go to Afghanistan. We are holding no hearings on the waste, fraud, and abuse in Afghanistan. I hope that after we get through the appropriations process, that we will start holding hearings. It's not fair to the American people that we would borrow money from China to send to Karzai in Afghanistan. And, Mr. Speaker, we all know that Karzai is not going to survive. The Taliban, who we're fighting, who are killing Americans today, will be the future leaders of Afghanistan. Every expert that I've spoken to, military and non-military, has said that the Taliban, which primarily are made up of Pashtuns, that's the largest tribe in Afghanistan, that in time they will be the leaders of Afghanistan. It is time for this Congress to wake up and join the American people. 75% of the American people say we want out of Afghanistan, we want to bring our troops home, we want to stop wasting money. So, Mr. Speaker, before I close, I'd also like to reiterate this cartoon. It's Karzai standing at a CIA ATM machine. It's got bags of cash down at his feet, and the little guy's got a credit card that he's going to put into the machine like we all do here in America to get money from our own accounts. But he's not getting it from his own account. He's getting it from the CIA account. And then I see this poor soldier standing behind him that's saying, I'd like to make a quick withdrawal from here. Mr. Speaker, I ask God to please bless our men and women in uniform. I ask God to hold in his arms those families who've given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. I ask God to please bless the House and Senate that we would do what is right in the eyes of God. I ask God to please bless the President that he would do what is right in the eyes of God. And 3 times I will ask, God please, God please, God please continue to bless America, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, along with my colleague from California, Congresswoman Bass, express my sorrow for the victims of the terrible tragedy in Oklahoma, and I stand ready to work with my friends across the aisle to do all we can to alleviate the tragedy. Mr. Speaker, somewhere in Des Moines or San Antonio, there is a young gay person who all of a sudden realizes that he or she is gay and knows that if their parents find out, they will be tossed out of the house. Their classmates will taunt the child, and the Anita Bryants and John Briggses are doing their part on TV, and that child has several options: staying in the closet or suicide. And then one day, that child might open the paper that says, homosexual elected in San Francisco. And there are 2 new options. The option is to go to California or stay in San Antonio and fight. 2 days after I was elected, I got a phone call, and a voice was quite young. It was from Altoona, Pennsylvania. And the person said, thanks. And you've got to elect gay people so that thousands upon thousands like that child know that there is a hope for a better world. There is hope for a better tomorrow. Without hope, not only gays, but those who are blacks, the Asians, the disabled, the seniors, the us's. Without hope, the us's give up. I know that you can't live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. And you, and you, and you, and you have got to give them hope. Those words, Mr. Speaker, were spoken by Harvey Milk. It is with tremendous honor and gratitude that I enter them into the congressional record on his behalf and all of the us's in our nation. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is good news in our pursuit for a repository to hold our nation's spent nuclear fuel and nuclear waste, although it went largely unreported. Officials from both the Department of Energy and Nuclear Regulatory Commission have publicly admitted that neither agency had identified any technical issues that would prevent us from being able to develop a safe repository at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. This admission came during a recent hearing before the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee in response to a question from my friend and colleague, Mr. Frelinghuysen, the subcommittee chairman. To stakeholders in the nuclear waste debate, this fact should come as no surprise. Why else would Greg Jaczko, Senator Reid's former staffer, abuse his authority as NRC chairman and deceive his commission colleagues to scuttle publication of the agency's safety review? If Yucca Mountain were as scientifically flawed as Senator Reid says it is, then he would have benefited by having the agency's conclusions released publicly. Instead, Senator Reid got a promise from President Obama to shut down the program. President Obama obliged with no basis other than the cryptic statements about Yucca Mountain being unworkable. Meanwhile, Senator Reid's protege, Mr. Jaczko, made sure the NRC's independent technical conclusions never saw the light of day. These actions have been challenged in court. The state attorneys general for both Washington and South Carolina, together with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, Aiken County, South Carolina, and Nye County, Nevada, have all alleged that the NRC has violated the Nuclear Waste Policy Act by ceasing its review of the Yucca Mountain license application, which is mandated under the law. The case is currently before the District of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals. When President Obama took office, he said that this administration would restore scientific integrity in government decision-making, and I quote, shortly after taking office, he issued a presidential memorandum stating, and I quote again, political officials should not suppress or alter scientific or technological findings and conclusions. If scientific and technological information is developed and used by the federal government, it should ordinarily be made available to the public, except for information that is properly restricted from disclosure. Each agency should make available to the public the scientific and technical findings and conclusions considered or relied upon in policy decisions. The public must be confident that public officials will not conceal or distort the scientific findings that are relevant to policy choices. He reaffirmed these statements recently when addressing the National Academy of Science. And I quote again, in all the sciences, we've got to make sure that we are supporting the idea that they're not subject to politics, that they're not skewed by an agenda, that, as I said before, we make sure that we go where the evidence leads us. Mr. Speaker, I find it very difficult to reconcile these pronouncements with the Yucca Mountain situation as it stands today. Electricity consumers and taxpayers have invested $15 billion to find a safe disposal site for our nation's civilian spent fuel and the nuclear waste left over from the Cold War. After investing 30 years and $15 billion in Yucca Mountain, they deserve at a minimum for the independent nuclear safety regulator, the NRC, to release its conclusions on whether the site is safe or not. Given the admissions from these DOE and NRC officials, it appears we have found a safe solution to our nation's nuclear waste problem, Yucca Mountain. The bad news is that this administration would rather play politics than solve the problem. Transparency and scientific integrity should not be debased into political buzzwords easily cast aside for the sake of political favors. Mr. Speaker, the American people deserve better. They deserve to know the truth about Yucca Mountain. It's outrageous that they must go to court to get it. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Our hearts go out to the people of Oklahoma and our colleague, Representative Tom Cole, whose district has been devastated by the latest catastrophe that has befallen our country. I recall the great courage of Tom Cole on this floor and in his conference, putting aside politics and ideology and voting for relief after Hurricane Sandy. As the death toll rises and the search and rescue valiantly continues, let us not just offer our prayers as much as they are needed and welcome, but let us act as united citizens and send with all due speed relief for the people of Oklahoma. Disasters and tragedies should never be about ideology or politics or geographic locale. When Americans are in need of help, this Congress needs to respond. That is who we are as a people. That's what leads us to become a more perfect union. Any American befallen by tragedy or national disaster needs the assistance of its nation and its fellow Americans. Let us act in this Congress before we leave, before we go on an extended break. Let us take action on behalf of the citizens of Oklahoma. Let us put aside and let us damn politics and ideology and act on behalf of the American people and these people of Oklahoma who are enduring so much through this natural disaster. God bless America. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Rigel. Without objection.
I thank the Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, this morning I consider it a joy and really a special privilege to rise today to honor the 200-plus anniversary of the SeaTac community, the oldest African-American community in the United States. The community, named for the sea attack of the coast by the British Navy, is a stalwart in Hampton Roads, steadfastly protecting civil rights and promoting the African-American community. Throughout its proud history, the SeaTac community has stood for doing what is right in the face of adversity. Going back to the early 1800s, SeaTac fishermen braved the rough waters of the Atlantic to save the passengers of a ship that had wrecked off the coast. The men of SeaTac have fought in every major American war, including serving as air raid wardens in World War II to protect the citizens of Virginia Beach from potential air strikes. And when the SeaTac community needed a fire department, the SeaTac veterans from World War II came together to build the first fire department owned and operated by African Americans. Even in its early days, Mr. Speaker, SeaTac has shown a commitment to educating its youth. In 1908, SeaTac parents formed their first school at Mount Olive Baptist Church, and a few years later formed the SeaTac Public School League. Later, the community provided the land for the SeaTac Elementary School. And today, SeaTac continues its commitment to education by providing funding for college students. Mr. Speaker, I am truly honored to represent this amazing community within my district. Their continuous hard work to promote education, civil rights, and a safe Hampton Roads community are nothing short of admirable. In October 2011 and October 2012, the community celebrated 200-plus years of being a vibrant, active, engaged, and historical community. And thanks to the contributions of the community historian who I've gotten to know and I greatly respect, Sadie Shaw, she's really just the preeminent holder of all the history of the wonderful community. Because of her and so many others, the legacy of the historical community of SeaTac will continue to be perpetuated for generations to come. So I congratulate them as the legacy continues, and we just ask that God would continue to bless that wonderful community and this wonderful country that we're privileged to live in. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California. Ms. Pelosi, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's with great sadness that I rise today to extend sympathy to the people of Oklahoma, to our colleague, Congressman Cole, for his and his constituents who have been affected by the tornado. We just heard our President talk about just that our prayers and our deeds are with the people of the community. We just heard Mr. Larson talk about our acting immediately to provide the assistance to the people there to the extent that Congress can act quickly upon that. We should. It is, we've seen natural disasters come and go, and they're all terrible, and the loss of life is tragic, and the loss of belongings and the rest is saddening, and it's very hard to see how people can be made whole, but we are always hopeful that they will be. That hope springs, people say, where do you find hope in a situation like that? Well, it sits there comfortably between faith. We believe, and therefore we have hope in the charity of others that we can work together to come through this. Referencing other, whether it's earthquakes in California or storms in the Northeast, whatever it happens to be, hurricanes in the South and Katrina, etc., it's always, always, always tragic. There's something especially deeply saddening about what happened in Oklahoma City, and it reminded me immediately of something that I carry in my heart. A long time ago, I went to Italy, representative President Carter in 1980 with a congressional delegation plus, to deliver U.S. assistance following an earthquake in southern Italy. In one small town in the mountains that we visited, the roof of the church collapsed. And what was tragic about it that resembles what happened in Oklahoma is that in that church that day was the first grade, and they were practicing for First Holy Communion. So every 7-year-old child in that village was a casualty. Everyone died. And so when there's loss of life, of course, it's always tragic. Everyone is a valuable life. But when every 7-year-old in the village dies, it just does something to your psyche. It's so sad. You grieve so deeply. It's so hard to console people. And to see what happened to the school in Oklahoma City, and to see that 20 little children lost their lives, each one of them precious, all of them the future of the community. How deep the grief must be there. How we must, in a very particular way, try to help wipe the tears away from that community. So many little children. And a beautiful sight to see the first responders trying to dig people out, and successfully. Pictured today, a beautiful little boy pulled out from the rubble. The teachers making a valiant effort to cover children so that a falling debris did not harm those who were still alive. And so whether it was first responders or teachers or families, community coming together. But this community has suffered a great loss of lives, horrible, loss of homes, just what was a home became debris in a matter of seconds, in a matter of minutes. And so I hope that we all know what our responsibility is, because these children are America's children, and that the number of them who died have such an impact on the community, and that we all appreciate the depth of the grief, the depth of the tragedy that has befallen. I'll never, ever forget the look in the eyes of the people of that village in the mountains of Italy. Just desperate, just desperate. But as I say, we're always hopeful that through prayer, which gives us strength, faith, which gives us hope, the charity of others, which helps us to go forward. So I hope it is a comfort of the people of the region that their loss is one that is shared and mourned by people across the world, certainly in our country, and definitely in this Congress of the United States. And whatever is in our power to be helpful to them, we will do, and we will do quickly. And that, most importantly, they will always, always, always and ever be in our prayers. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most disturbing aspects of the unfolding scandal involving the misuse of the IRS is what can only be described as an insatiable appetite for names, names, and more names. Conservative groups, and only conservative groups, seeking to organize under Section 501 were subjected to pages of intrusive and irrelevant questions, but with a common theme. Give us the names. Give us the names of your volunteers. Give us the names of your donors and your family members and your business associates. Give us the names of speakers and audience participants at your meetings. One man, applying to form a group to educate teenagers in constitutional principles, was told to turn over the names of his students. As he told a reporter, "Can you imagine my responsibility to parents if I disclosed the names of their children to the IRS?" Nor was this tactic limited to new applications. The Venerable Leadership Institute, which has been schooling young people in constitutional principles for 40 years, was put through a year-long audit. The IRS wasn't only interested in financial information, they wanted the names of the students and their college interns, and the names of anyone who had subsequently hired these young people. And when the IRS wasn't demanding the names of ordinary Americans, or asking what they were reading or thinking or saying, in some cases applicants were given names and told to reveal what they knew about these people. Mr. Speaker, these are facts that are undisputed by the administration and its apologists. For a period of more than 2 years, these questions were put to Americans whose political opinions had been singled out by one of the most powerful and feared agencies of the federal government. What I would like to know is why. Why did the IRS demand lists of names of thousands of Americans whose only common characteristic is that they disagreed with this administration? Where are these lists now? With whom were they shared? Who wanted to know these names? What possible use would the IRS have to track the names of high school students who simply wanted to learn about their Constitution? But most importantly, what were these names used for, and what are they being used for? I don't have an answer to these questions, but I find their implications deeply disturbing, and they must be answered during the course of the investigations now underway, and they must be answered in full and with certainty. I cannot conceive of the reasons why the federal government would be so interested in compiling such lists, but we know for a fact that they were, and that fact is undisputed. What we don't know is why. And knowing the answer to that question and the other questions raised by this undisputed fact is absolutely essential to a society that values its freedom of speech, its freedom of assembly, its freedom of press, and its freedom of conscience. We know the ancillary effect of these illegal demands. They dried up donations to these conservative groups. They heavily suppressed volunteer activities. We know some lists were leaked to liberal publications like the Huffington Post and ProPublica. What we don't know is what was the direct purpose of gathering these names. The administration spokesman this weekend said the law is irrelevant and called it a distraction. Well, on the contrary, this strikes at the very foundation of a free society, the rule of law, the right of the people to question the policies of their government without fear of retribution or intimidation. 75 years ago, Winston Churchill warned of a state of society where men may not speak their minds, where children denounce their parents to the police, where a businessman or small shopkeeper ruins his competitor by telling tales about his private opinions. If it is possible that we have taken even a single step down the road that leads to such places, then that situation should occupy our full and undistracted attention. Until it is fully and completely rectified, new safeguards are erected against its recurrence, and those responsible are held fully accountable. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Mrs. Roybal-Allard, 4 or 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to challenge my colleagues to make optimal maternity outcomes a priority in our country. Tragically, childbirth in this wealthiest of nations has significantly greater risk for mothers and babies when compared to almost all other developed nations. In the U.S., more than 2 women die every day from pregnancy-related causes, and more than 1/3 of all women who give birth experience some type of complication with an adverse effect on their health. These tragedies are most often found in communities of color. Regrettably, mothers aren't the only victims of our maternity care system. Sadly, out of every 1,000 babies born in the United States, nearly 7 babies die. Particularly disturbing is that since 1991, premature birth, the leading cause of low birth weight and infant mortality, has actually increased in our country by more than 30%. Adding to this concern is that the U.S. spends more than double of any country in the world on maternity care and still ranks far behind most developed countries in maternal and infant outcomes. Clearly, something must be done to protect mothers and babies. While it is important to continue studying the causes, we already know many factors that contribute to poor birth outcomes and high costs. One well-established factor is that current U.S. medical practice does not follow the vast body of research that exists on the best evidence-based maternity care. This includes the research of credible studies showing that multiple non-invasive maternity practices can produce considerable improvement in birth outcomes without detrimental side effects to mother or baby. 2 examples of these non-invasive, relatively simple practices significantly underused during pregnancy are group models of prenatal care and smoking cessation programs. Unfortunately, the U.S. also has a widespread overuse of cesarean sections and scheduled inductions. The overuse of these practices, which are beneficial only in limited situations, have been associated with complications that jeopardize the health of mother and baby, and with longer hospital stays and multiple costly procedures. These tragically poor childbirth outcomes and high costs must no longer be tolerated in our country. Therefore, this week I am introducing the Maximizing Optimal Maternity Services for the 21st Century Act, better known as the MOMS Act. This bill will create a coordinating committee to ensure that federal agencies are on the same page in promoting the best evidence-based maternity practices in their programs, and it will facilitate across maternity professions collaboration in the education of a diverse maternity care workforce. In addition, the MOMS Act authorizes grant programs for professional organizations to recruit and retain minority maternity care providers. The MOMS Act also establishes an online database to make available the best evidence-based maternity care information to women and families, and it authorizes a consumer education campaign focused on how to achieve the healthiest maternity outcomes. The Moms for the 21st Century Act further expands research on the best maternity practices and on the identification of the geographic areas that lack adequate maternity health care providers. Mr. Speaker, we can and must do better for our mothers and newborns. As a country, we must reach beyond our self-imposed boundaries and embrace a cost-effective, evidence-based model of maternity care that reflects our values and saves the lives of mothers and babies. I urge my colleagues to join me in this effort by co-sponsoring and helping to pass the Moms for the 21st Century Act. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are probably very few issues that touch Americans, families, our states, small businesses, more personally than health care. This House has dealt numerous times with addressing the Affordable Care Act. But when we talk about it on that very personal level, of a mom taking a sick child down to visit the doctor, to a senior citizen that's counting on that hospital being able to be there, to be able to deliver the care that they need. We need to recognize that the overarching view that Washington typically performs when passing a bill and delivering it to the American people, that it has very real consequences, very real impacts. In my district in rural Colorado, and in fact throughout rural America, there is a looming health care crisis that is just on the horizon. That ability to be able to go to the doctor, to be able to have a hospital that's going to be there to be able to provide the service that's necessary. They're feeling that real impact right now at home. We've had a lot of discussion about that big overarching bill, the IPAB boards that are going to be making the medical choices for our senior citizens, indeed for all Americans, rather than that choice being made between the doctor and the patient, about the state mandates that are coming through, the Medicare payment cuts, higher health costs, the budget that is now going to be estimated at $1,760 billion in cost over a 10-year period, and rising on a struggling American economy, on struggling families and small businesses. The 150 new boards that are being established, the better than 12,000 pages of new regulations that our hospitals, our doctors, our families are going to have to be dealing with. And the short form to simply be able to fill out and to be able to apply for the Affordable Care Act, 21 pages just to be able to get insurance. We need, Mr. Speaker, to be talking about those real impacts, not from the 30,000-foot view, but on the ground at home. I recently went to Delta Memorial Hospital in my district, a small community hospital that's proud of their service. In fact, they've had multiple surveys that went through and rated their service among the best. They're now being challenged by the Affordable Care Act in terms of that health care delivery. We have a program called the Recovery Audit Contracts, conducted by individual companies that don't even have to have health care background, that are going back in and reassessing costs, and they're having to pay back money now, money that they simply do not have. We're seeing reimbursements to doctors drop at Delta Memorial Hospital, making it harder for the physicians to be able to deliver that service. These are small hospitals. They don't have big HR departments. They're there for the health of the community. But they are seeing real challenges in being able to continue, and in fact, in many of our rural hospitals, they're beginning to wonder if they're going to be able to continue to deliver that service. I've talked to doctors in Delta, Montrose, Grand Junction, Pueblo, throughout my entire district, who are frustrated that they are now seeing their reimbursements, money that they need to be able to conduct their business, being cut by the federal government determining what the value of that service is going to be and saying you can simply afford it. That's not real life. And what we're seeing now are senior citizens who just became senior citizens by the virtue of a birthday over the last few months. They cannot find a doctor who is willing to take Medicare simply because they can no longer afford it. We have a system, Mr. Speaker, that completely forgot the original premise that every American, I believe, can agree on. We need to have real reform, but we need to go back to that initial premise of affordability and accessibility. The Affordable Care Act fails on both levels. We are seeing right now in my home state of Colorado, estimates for individual insurance policies this year are going to go up an estimated 23% or more. For small businesses who are trying to provide group insurance, they are seeing their costs going up this year, estimated better than 17%. Have we achieved more affordability as was promised? We have not. When we're talking about that accessibility issue, when that senior citizen in Delta, Colorado walks into a doctor's office and is told that they aren't accepting any new patients, are we achieving that accessibility? We are not. Mr. Speaker, we need to go back to that original premise, because so many small businesses right now that would like to be able to deliver that service are feeling the impact. I have a friend who owns several small Pizza Huts throughout the West, and she is dealing with those additional costs that are hurting her business and her ability to be able to deliver that real service for her employees. We have a challenge in this country, Mr. Speaker, and it can and will be addressed if we will go back to that original premise of affordability and accessibility. The Affordable Care Act fails on both points. Let's roll up our sleeves and get the job done for the American people. And with that, I yield back.
Pursuant to Clause 12, Parent A of Rule 1, Chair declares House in recess to the hour of 12 noon today.
When the House returns at noon Eastern for legislative work, 6 bills on the calendar today, including several dealing with veterans issues and one on fishing rights downstream from certain dams. Will have live House coverage at noon Eastern here on C-SPAN. And a reminder that the 2013 Congressional Directory is now available. It's a handy guide to the current Congress with updated listings for each member of the House and Senate. Contact information